My heart still races when I remember that day. I was in the middle of the plaza, the weight of years of anger and confusion consuming me when I raised the wrench against the statue of the Virgin Mary. With one blow, I tore that image apart, feeling the impact echo in the silence of the crowd. Pieces of marble fell to the ground, as if I could destroy everything she stood for. But seconds later, something impossible happened. Something that changed my life forever, turning my hatred into a living testimony of faith and redemption. My name is Rashid, and this is my story. I grew up in a Muslim community in a vibrant Canadian city where religious differences sometimes created quiet tensions. My life was not easy. I faced prejudices, financial difficulties, and the feeling of being lost without a clear purpose. I was influenced by voices that fed my frustration, convincing me that symbols like that statue were an affront to my faith. That day, I came to the plaza with a hardened heart, carrying a wrench and a blind determination. It wasn't just marble I wanted to break. It was something bigger, something I didn't even fully understand. The plaza was full that overcast morning. The air carried the sound of conversations, children playing, and the faint aroma of flowers placed at the foot of the statue. The image of the Virgin Mary, carved in white marble, was in the center, with her hands open in a gesture that seemed to welcome everyone. For me at that time, she was just a symbol of division, something I felt I needed to confront. I approached, feeling the stares of the crowd, some curious, some hostile. My chest tightened, but I mistook this feeling for courage. As I held the wrench, a part of me hesitated. I remembered my mother, who, despite being a devout Muslim, always spoke of respect and peace between people. But the anger spoke louder. I shouted harsh words, accusing the statue of being a false idol. The crowd fell silent, and I felt the weight of that moment. Then, with all my might, I struck. The sound of the impact was like thunder, and the statue shattered, fragments flying across the ground. Dust rose, and for an instant I felt an emptiness, as if I had crossed a line I couldn't undo. But then something happened. A soft light seemed to rise from the broken pieces, barely noticeable at first, but enough to make my heart stop. I didn't understand what I was seeing, but I felt a presence, as if someone was looking at me with love, not judgment. It was as if the Virgin Mary, even in pieces, was there calling me to something greater. At that moment, I began to feel the weight of what I had done, but also a spark of hope that I had never known. As I share this with you, I feel we are connected by this story. If you were moved by this beginning, give it the like and subscribe to the Mary's Intercession channel. Thus, you will receive more stories that can touch your heart and strengthen your spiritual journey. And feel free to write in the comments of which city or country you hear us from. It is always a joy to know that people from all over the world unite for stories of hope like this. Returning to the plaza, the overcast sky seemed to reflect my inner turmoil, highlighting the scattered fragments. The crowd reacted in different ways. Some shouted in protest, others just watched shocked. I stood still, wrench still in hand, my chest rising and falling with heavy breathing. What had I done? Why, instead of triumph, did I feel a void? It was then that I noticed something strange. The air seemed lighter, as if a gentle breeze had swept away the tension. The pieces of the statue glowed subtly, and I couldn't look away. In that instant, memories of my childhood surfaced. My mother taught me to respect the sacred, but I got lost in a path of anger and confusion. The destruction of that statue was supposed to be my revolt against the world. But now I asked myself, what if I was wrong? What if there was something bigger, something I didn't understand? This doubt was the first step to what would come next, a transformation I could never have predicted. As the dust settled, I felt eyes on me. It wasn't just anger. There was compassion on some faces, as if they knew I was lost. A man approached a Christian from the crowd, and instead of condemning me, touched my shoulder and said, "Did you ever think she might be praying for you right now?" Your words hit me like lightning. For the first time, I considered that the Virgin Mary, whom I saw as a strange symbol, could be more a spiritual mother interceding even for someone like me. I didn't know it at the time, but that moment marked the beginning of a journey. The light in the fragments, the presence I felt, the compassion of that stranger. All this planted a seed. My faith, which I thought was so firm, began to open up to something new. I was no longer just the man who destroyed the statue. I was someone who was about to find an unexpected path. This story is about more than an act of anger. It is about how divine love can reach even the most hardened hearts. As I stood there, wrench in hand, and the weight of what I did, I felt something I couldn't explain. It was as if the Virgin Mary, even through a broken statue, was calling me home. The dust still hung in the air, and the heavy silence of the plaza seemed to swallow everything around me. I, Rashid, stood there with a wrench hanging in my hand, looking at the fragments of the statue of the Virgin Mary scattered on the ground. The subtle glow I saw in the pieces left me confused, as if something bigger was at work, but I couldn't process it yet. My heart beat fast, no longer from anger, but from a restlessness I could not name. The crowd around me murmured, some angry, others with tears in their eyes. But I felt isolated, trapped in my own thoughts. Before that day, my life was a constant battle. I grew up in a neighborhood where people worked hard, but didn't always see rewards. My father was a construction worker, always with his hands dirty with concrete dust, trying to support our family. He taught me to be strong, but he also warned me about how unfair the world could be. After he passed away, victim of an accident at a work site, my mother began to carry the weight alone. She prayed 5 times a day, always with a rug facing east, and encouraged me to find peace and faith. But over time, my faith turned to revolt. I saw the difficulties around me, unemployment, suspicious looks because of my religion, and began to blame everything and everyone, including symbols like that statue. That day, I arrived at the plaza with a clear purpose. I had heard voices in my community, people who spoke with contempt about Christian religious images. They said they were idolatry, that they offended the true faith. These words mingled with my anger, and I convinced myself that destroying the statue would be an act of justice, a way of affirming who I was. But now, with the pieces on the ground, I didn't feel justice. I felt an emptiness that made me question everything. The plaza was a common place in the city, a point where people gathered for events, markets, or just to pass the time. The statue of the Virgin Mary stood on a simple pedestal surrounded by weekly flower arrangements that faithful regularly left. I saw her every day as I passed by, but I had never stopped to really look at that moment. With the fragments scattered, I noticed details that I had not noticed before. The softness of the carved hands, as if they offered something that I did not deserve. It moved me in a way I didn't expect. As I stood there, the crowd began to stir. One man shouted, "Why did you do that?" An older woman with a rosary in her hand wept softly, praying something I did not understand. I wanted to answer to justify my anger, but the words did not come. Instead, my eyes went back to the fragments. The light I had seen seemed to pulse as if it were alive. It was subtle, almost like a reflection of the overcast sky, but there was something different, something that made my chest tighten in a new way. I remember a story my mother told about Prophet Muhammad, about how he always chose mercy even in the face of enemies. At that moment, I began to wonder if I had betrayed these teachings. My intention was to confront, but what I really did was divide. The compassion of that Christian who touched my shoulder the moment before echoed my mind. Did you ever think she might be praying for you right now? How could it be? How could a figure I rejected be linked to me in any way? I didn't know it, but something was changing inside me. The plaza, which moments before was a stage of conflict, now seemed charged with a different energy. Some people approached the fragments as if they wanted to protect what was left. Others began to pray aloud, their words mingling in a soft chorus. I felt like a stranger there, but at the same time, part of something bigger. It was as if the Virgin Mary, even in pieces, was uniting us all. As I watched, a specific memory surfaced. When I was a child, my mother took me to a mosque where a religious leader talked about the importance of respecting other faiths. He said that God sees the heart, not just the actions. That day in the plaza, I began to feel that maybe God was seeing my heart, Not the hardened heart that held the wrench, but the one that was beginning to open up to something new. I still held the wrench, but it felt heavier now, as if it carried the weight of my choices. I looked at the crowd and saw faces that weren't just angry. There was hope in them, as if they believed something good could come out of that chaos. It disarmed me. For the first time, I considered that the Virgin Mary, whom I saw as a distant symbol, could be more, perhaps a bridge, not a barrier. As the light in the fragments continued to grab my attention, I felt an urgent need to understand what was happening. My act of destruction, which was supposed to make me feel powerful, left me vulnerable. But in that vulnerability, there was a promise of something greater. I didn't know what was coming next, but I felt like I was on the threshold of a transformation I could never have foreseen. The glow on the fragments of the statue seemed to pulse stronger now, as if in defiance of the chaos I, Rashid, had caused. The plaza, once filled with murmurs and protests, was in an eerie silence, as if everyone expected something. I still held the wrench, but it felt like an anchor pulling me into a place of doubt that I had never faced before. My chest was tight, no longer from the anger that drove me to destroy the statue of the Virgin Mary, but from a confusion that mixed guilt, fear, and something I couldn't name, perhaps hope. As I stood there among the pieces of marble, I felt the eyes of the crowd upon me. Some faces showed indignation, others sadness, but there were also those who looked at me with a compassion that I did not deserve. A young man, perhaps my age, held a crucifix and prayed softly, his eyes fixed on the fragments. An older woman with a veil covering her hair knelt near the wreckage as if to protect them. I wanted to explain myself to say that my anger was not against them, but against a world that seemed to reject me. But the words stuck in my throat. In that moment, I began to question everything that led me there. My life had been a series of battles against prejudice, against poverty, against the feeling of not belonging. I grew up hearing that my faith was the right path, but I also saw how religious differences divided people in the city. When I heard voices speaking out against images like that statue, I thought destroying something like that would be a way of asserting my identity. Now, with the fragments at my feet, I wondered, what did I really believe? Was my anger my own, or just an echo of other voices? The overcast sky was still gray, reflecting off the broken pieces of the statue. Each fragment seemed to carry a story that I did not know. I noticed for the first time how the expression of the Virgin Mary, even in broken marble, conveyed peace. It was like she didn't judge me despite what I did. I remembered a conversation with my uncle years ago who said that God always finds a way to talk to those who are lost. In that instant, I began to feel that maybe it was true, but it was not as I expected. The crowd began to move, some approaching, others moving away. A man shouted something I didn't understand, but the tone was angry. I prepared to fight back, as I always did when I felt cornered. But then a woman, perhaps in her 50s, got up from the group and walked up to me. She didn't scream. She didn't point the finger. Instead, he said in a calm voice, "Have you ever felt an emptiness that you can't explain?" Your words hit me like a punch. That was exactly what I felt there with the wrench in my hand and the statue destroyed. I wanted to answer, but I could only shake my head. She continued, "I felt that too. But I learned that there is a mother in heaven who never gives up on us." She pointed to the fragments, and her eyes shone with tears, but also with a certainty that puzzled me. I didn't understand what she meant, but her words stuck with me like a seed planted in dry soil. Meanwhile, the glow on the pieces of the statue seemed to grow. Or maybe it was my imagination. It was as if light came from within, not just a reflection of the overcast sky. I found myself staring, trying to understand what I was seeing. My heart, which moments before was beating angrily, was now racing for another reason. It was as if something or someone was calling me, not with words, but with a presence I couldn't ignore. I remember a moment from my childhood when my mother took me to help at a community event. There were Christians and Muslims working together, and I as a child did not understand why this was so special. My mother said, "God unites us even when we think we are separated." In that plaza with the statue in pieces, I began to feel that maybe she was right. But how? I was responsible for that chaos. How could there be unity after what I did? Tension in the plaza was growing. Some people began to argue among themselves, torn between anger and sadness. I felt at the center of everything, but also apart, as if I were a stranger in my own story. The wrench in my hand seemed useless now, a symbol of my confusion. I dropped it to the ground, and the sound of metal against concrete echoed, drawing even more attention. While looking at the fragments, a specific memory came back. When my father died, I rebelled against God, asking why he had to suffer. My mother patiently said that sometimes pain is a path to something greater. At that moment in the plaza, I began to wonder if my own pain, the anger, the loss, the despair, could be the beginning of something new. The Virgin Mary, whom I saw as a strange symbol, was beginning to look like something else. A presence that did not shake even when the marble broke. I didn't know what was coming, but I felt something was changing. The light in the fragments, the presence I felt, the compassion of that stranger. All this planted a seed. My faith, which I thought was so firm, began to open up to something new. I was no longer just the man who destroyed the statue. I was someone who was about to find an unexpected path. This story is about more than an act of anger. It is about how divine love can reach even the most hardened hearts. As I stood there, wrench dropped and the weight of what I did, I felt something I couldn't explain. It was as if the Virgin Mary, even through a broken statue, was calling me home. The sound of the wrench falling to the concrete still echoed in the plaza, but was now drowned out by the growing murmur of the crowd. I, Rashid, was at the center of it all with the fragments of the statue of the Virgin Mary scattered at my feet. The glow I saw on the pieces seemed stronger, almost as if in defiance of the destruction I had caused. My heart was pounding, caught between the weight of guilt and an inexplicable sense that something bigger was happening. I wanted to run, hide from those dozens of eyes that stared at me, but my feet seemed to stick to the ground. The tension in the plaza was palpable. Some people shouted, demanding that I explain my act. Others knelt, touching the fragments with reverence, as if they still saw holiness in them. A middle-aged man with a cross hanging around his neck pointed at me and said, "You don't understand what you destroyed." His words hurt, not out of anger, but because for the first time I was beginning to feel that he might be right. The statue wasn't just marble. It was a symbol of something I didn't understand. But that moved me in a profound way. I looked at the pieces again. The light that came from them was no longer subtle. It was clear, pulsating as if it had a life of its own. A larger fragment, part of the Virgin's face, still held a carved eye, and I swear I felt that look cross me. It was not an accusation, but a kind of invitation, as if to say, there is still time. My chest tightened, and for the first time in years, I felt tears trickle down my face. I, who prided myself on being strong, was crumbling before a broken statue. At that moment, a memory surfaced. When I was a teenager, my mother found me crying after a fight at school. She hugged me and said, "God doesn't judge our tears. He collects them." In a plaza with waterlogged eyes, I felt as if someone was collecting my tears now. But who? I didn't believe in the Virgin Mary, not the way those people did. Still, the presence I felt was undeniable, like a hug that I didn't deserve but was offered to me. The crowd began to approach the fragments, forming a semicircle around me. A young woman holding a burning candle said in a low voice, "She always forgives." Always. His words were not to me, but to the statue or to what it represented. I didn't know what to think. My mind, shaped by years of rigid convictions, struggled against what my heart was beginning to feel. I destroyed something sacred to those people. But instead of hatred, some offered me words of peace. How was that possible? The glow on the pieces of the statue seemed to intensify, and now others noticed it too. One man exclaimed, "Look, it's shining." The crowd stirred, some pointing, others praying louder. I took a step back, scared, but unable to look away. The light was not just a reflection. It was as if it came from within the marble, warm, alive. My body was shaking, and I didn't know if it was fear or something deeper. For the first time, I considered that maybe my anger had been a mistake, not just against the crowd, but against something bigger. Meanwhile, a woman began to sing. a soft melody that spoke of a mother who intercedes for her children. His voice was so clear that it seemed to cut through the tension of the plaza. Others joined in, and the sound grew, enveloping everyone. I didn't know the lyrics, but something in that song touched a place inside me that I had forgotten. It was as if, for a moment, the anger that defined me dissolved, making room for something new. I remembered a day when my father, still alive, took me to repair an old building. He said, "Sometimes you have to break something to understand how to fix it." In the plaza, with the statue in pieces, I began to wonder if my own life, broken by loss and anger, could be fixed. The Virgin Mary, whom I saw as a strange symbol, was beginning to seem like a bridge to something I desperately needed: redemption. The crowd was now divided between prayers and discussions. Some wanted to confront me. Others seemed more focused on the light emanating from the fragments. I felt small, as if the weight of my act was greater than I could carry. But at the same time, that light held me there, as if to say that there was still a purpose for me, even after what I had done. As the singing continued, a gentle breeze passed through the plaza, lifting the dust from the fragments. It was then that something even stranger happened. The pieces began to vibrate almost imperceptibly, as if responding to the music. I blinked, thinking it was my imagination, but others noticed too. One woman shouted, "It's a sign." My heart soared. I didn't believe in signs, or at least I didn't before. But there, before my eyes, something was happening. Something that defied everything I thought I knew. I didn't know what was coming next, but I felt like I was on the verge of something impossible. The plaza, which moments before was a stage of destruction, now seemed like a place where the divine was manifesting. My mind struggled to understand, but my heart for the first time seemed ready to listen. The vibration of the fragments of the statue of the Virgin Mary grew, and the light emanating from them intensified, as if the very floor of the plaza was alive. Rashid, was paralyzed, my heart racing and my eyes fixed on the pieces that shone with a force that defied explanation. The crowd around me seemed to feel the same. The singing stopped and a reverent silence took over. It was as if time had stopped and all of us together were witnessing something that transcended anger, pain, and even my own guilt. Suddenly, the fragments began to move as if pulled by an invisible force. Pieces of marble that I had destroyed with the wrench began to slowly rise from the ground, floating in the air. The crowd held their breath, and I felt a shiver run through my body. It was not possible. Marble does not do this. But there, in front of everyone, the fragments lined up like pieces of a divine puzzle, beginning to again form the image of the Virgin Mary. The face, once broken, now came back together with that same serene look that seemed to see through me. I fell to my knees, not by choice, but because my legs gave way. Tears flowed down my face, and I no longer cared who I saw. The anger that drove me to the plaza, the weight of the wrench. Everything seemed small in the face of what was happening. I felt such a strong presence that it was as if someone was next to me holding my hand. It wasn't just the statue rebuilding itself. It was as if something inside me was also being restored. A woman in the crowd exclaimed, "It's the Virgin. She's here." Others began to pray, some aloud, others in whispers. A man who once shouted at me now cried, his hands covering his face. I looked at the statue, which was now almost whole, glowing with a soft light that warmed the air around. It was more than a physical miracle. It was as if the Virgin Mary was showing that her love could not be broken, neither by my anger nor by my wrench. At that moment, a memory from my childhood came back strongly. When I was 7, my mother took me to a community celebration where people of different faiths gathered to share food and stories. A Christian neighbor gave me a loaf of sweet bread and said, "God loves us all as a mother loves her children." I didn't understand it then, but now in the plaza, those words made sense. The Virgin Mary, whom I saw as a strange symbol, was revealing herself as a mother who rejected no one, not even someone like me, who had rejected her first. The statue was now complete, standing as if it had never been broken. The crowd erupted in cheers and prayers, but I remained silent, still on my knees. I felt a peace I had never known before, as if a huge weight had been lifted from my shoulders. My mind, which had always been full of questions and doubts, was quiet for the first time. I cannot explain what I saw, but my heart understood. It was a sign that redemption was possible, even for me. As I looked at the statue, a woman approached and touched my shoulder. It was the same one that had spoken to me before, the one that mentioned Mother in heaven. She smiled and said, "You see, she never gives up on us." His words echoed within me, and for the first time, I didn't feel like arguing or defending myself. Instead, I nodded, feeling something new grow within me, a faith that wasn't the same as the one I grew up knowing, but that felt true in a way I couldn't ignore. The plaza was now full of energy, as if the miracle had united us all. People who were once divided now hugged each other, prayed together. Some even sang again. I, who had felt a stranger moments before, began to feel that I belonged there, not as the man who destroyed the statue, but as someone who was being called to something greater. The Virgin Mary, through that miracle, seemed to say that love is stronger than any division. I stood up slowly, still shaking, and looked at the statue. His face, now restored, seemed to welcome me. I remembered something my mother said. God speaks to those who are ready to listen. I wasn't ready before, but now for the first time, I wanted to hear it. I wanted to understand what that miracle meant, not just to the crowd, but to me. The light from the statue began to soften, but the feeling of peace remained. The crowd was still ecstatic, but I felt something personal, as if the Virgin was speaking directly to me. My life, marked by anger and loss, seemed to be on the threshold of a transformation. I didn't know how, but I felt that moment was just the beginning of something that would change everything. And to everyone who hears my story, I want to say the love of the Virgin Mary is real. She meets you where you are, even in the darkest moments. Pray, trust, and you will see that the impossible can happen. If this story has touched your heart, give it a like and subscribe to the Mary's Intercession channel. Thus, you will receive more testimonies that bring light to your spiritual journey. And write in the comments where you hear us from.